Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight, nearly 20 years after the September 11th attacks, what has the U.S. learned about terrorism threats, both foreign and domestic?
Fires were still burning, the rubber, the smell of rubber, and it smelled like diesel fuel in the air.
Oak Lawn sent first responders to support New York after the attacks. We're live in the southwestern suburb.
WTTW News has learned of new allegations against 45th Ward Alderman Jim Gardiner. We have details on that.
A local author reflects on the bonds of family and friendship and growing up in Chicago in her new book.
The Bears start Andy Dalton at QB, but all eyes are on Justin Fields. We preview the upcoming season.
After canceling last summer, the Pitchfork Music Festival returns with a wide-ranging variety of up-and-coming musicians and established performing artists.
And Brandis and Paris, as you mentioned, I'll be reporting live tonight from Oak Lawn as part of our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series. Now parts of Oak Park, but right up to the city of Chicago. This southwest suburb, like many others, also has a strong Muslim population. As you noted, the village also sent some of its police and firefighters to help out in New York City after the 9/11 attacks some 20 years ago. So we'll have more on that, as well as a COVID update, and then we'll escape a little bit, have some fun. But first, back to you.
Amanda, thank you. And now to some of today's top stories. The federal government is rolling out new vaccine requirements that'll affect possibly 100 million Americans. The new rules mandate that all employers with more than 100 workers require them to either be vaccinated or to test weekly. President Joe Biden is also signing an executive order requiring vaccination for employees of the executive branch and contractors who do business with the federal government. And in that instance, there is not a COVID test option. Despite more than 208 million Americans having at least one dose of the vaccines, the U.S. is still seeing 300% more new COVID cases a day compared to 2 months ago as the Delta variant surges. 3 of the state's nuclear plants may avoid closure after an 11th hour energy agreement in Springfield. The bill would reportedly bail out ComEd's struggling nuclear fleet to the tune of $700 million from ratepayers. The amount that would amount to an average of $4.50 a month added on to a customer's utility bill. The bill also includes clean energy goals to get Illinois 100% off of carbon-based energy sources by 2050. Chicago public school students experiencing homelessness are getting a bit of extra help from the city in the form of $500 microgrants. The district and mayor's office today announced the $9 million Chicago Families Forward Fund. It's intended to help the highest need students and their families. The payments are made on a per student basis, so families with multiple eligible students can receive a grant for each child. The city says an overwhelming 98% of students in temporary living situations are students of color. The Emergency Assistance Program is being funded with money from the city's CARES Act allotment. Up next, Paris Schutz begins our coverage remembering the 9/11 attacks. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
In some ways, it seems like only yesterday. In others, it was a lifetime ago. This Saturday marks the 20th anniversary of the September 11th attacks, the deadliest such events in human history. Nearly 3,000 people died, including more than 340 firefighters and 72 law enforcement officers. Some 25,000 people were injured. The next day, September 12th, Chicago Tonight reported on the aftermath here in Chicago. From back in 2001, here is Rich Samuels.
Chicago returned to normal today with notable exceptions. The financial markets remained closed and enhanced security was visible around public buildings. The city today encouraged owners of private high-rises, residential and commercial, to do likewise.
First, they need to be very vigilant, and they need to be proactive, Each one of these buildings have security regulation. They can have a security policy, a security protocol, things that they have to go through. And right now, we're at the height of security, not only in this city, but across the country. And it's time for them to enforce those protocols.
At 12:30 today, the mayor announced that City Hall will become the venue for a blood drive. By 1:30, the line of would-be donors stretched more than half a block.
It was an eerie sight, a sparkling clear day and vast empty runways. Nothing was moving. Planes that carry much of the nation's mail, both UPS and FedEx, sat silently on the ground. Information as to when the airport would reopen changed throughout the day.
To the extent that we are moving or starting operations, that's why I said we're going to allow passengers who were diverted yesterday to be continuing on those flights.
But it was not clear when even those limited flights would be able to take off. Mayor Daley bristled when pressed on when O'Hare would reopen.
You cannot open one airport in this country and fly nowhere. It's impossible. And so that's why this has to be done in full cooperation with the airlines and FAA. Even though you open an airport, you have no place to go.
When passengers are allowed back here, it will be under very different rules, says the FAA. No curbside check-in, no off-airport check-in, no e-tickets. Only ticketed passengers allowed beyond security checks.
That was Rich Samuels and Elizabeth Brackett reporting for Chicago Tonight back on September 12th, 2001. Now, 20 years later, we assess what we've learned about terrorist threats and how safe the country is today. Joining us for that discussion are Thomas Makaitis, a DePaul University history professor with a focus on terrorism and international security. Hatem Abudaya, Executive Director of the Arab American Action Network, a local nonprofit organized for the Arab community in Chicago. And Robert Pape, a University of Chicago political science professor specializing in international security affairs. We welcome all of you here back to Chicago Tonight. And Professor Pape, I want to start with you because you were on this program right after 9/11, giving your thoughts on what had transpired. Let's take a look at that.
States and societies that have faced this level of air attack routinely go through emotional periods of tremendous anger, tremendous grief, and tremendous fear, which breeds deep desire for retribution and heavy retribution. The dilemma that we face in this case is that moving too quickly and too hastily for bowing to that emotion, I feel it myself, bowing to that emotion too hastily could well make matters worse.
As we know, in very short order, the United States engaged in wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So, Robert Pape, knowing what you said there, did the U.S. act too hastily after 9/11?
Yes, unfortunately, that clip really captures the heart of the reason for the problems that we've experienced in the war on terror. So although many of us hoped that the fear and anger that we felt on that day would not end up leading to overreaction, which would only make problems worse, both for innocents here in our own country, innocents overseas, and actually produce more terrorists than we killed, which was the actual result in Iraq and Afghanistan. The fundamental fact of the matter is that emotional wound of 9/11 caused a tremendous amount of desire for retribution and payback. And that overwhelmed good strategic sense, which then is the core reason underneath why we hassled and abused thousands and thousands of Americans in the United States who were not terrorists.
Right, there's that.
Why we invaded Iraq, which had not been attacking us and didn't have weapons of mass destruction. Underneath it all was unfortunately that emotion that was caused by 9/11.
We know how those two.
That's what the terrorists wanted.
We know how those two conflicts have resulted. Thomas Makaitis, 20 years later, how is life in America still impacted by what happened that day and the subsequent fallout?
Well, the bitter irony is that the anniversary comes immediately after the withdrawal from Iraq. And as Bob said, one of the most unfortunate things was the global war on terrorism, because those of us who studied this were very leery of that from the beginning, because you don't make war in an ism. It virtually guaranteed perpetual conflict. And we have wasted about $4 trillion on Iraq and Afghanistan. and GWAT became a pretext for invading Afghanistan. And on top of that, the Islamophobia, the anti-immigrant sentiment fueled into what we didn't yet realize at the time was a growing wave of white supremacy, which would peak in 2016 with the election of Donald Trump, and sadly is still very much with us.
Certainly a trend of nativism among some pockets of this country. Hatem Abadia, to that point, how has life changed in the last 20 years for Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, both immediately after 9/11 and still today in 2021?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that, you know, the United States went into Afghanistan in that war really for its resources, and did the same in Iraq 2 years later. You know, there was the pretext for war, but essentially there were billions and billions of dollars that were made by defense contractors, other multinational corporations, including the Dick Cheney's previous company, Halliburton, of which he was the CEO, and he was as the vice president at that time. So it was a war for empire, and there were rich resources in Afghanistan and Iraq that the U.S. wanted to get a piece of and didn't want China, Russia, and other, some Western European countries to get those. So I believe it's important to talk about the context of the wars as well, and then how they affected our community. Almost immediately, 1,000 Arabs and Muslims were detained. The Patriot Act was passed, massive surveillance of our community across the country, and then special registration of 2002, in which 83,000 men from 24 Arab or Muslim majority countries were forced to get fingerprinted, photographed, interviewed by the INS at the time, Immigration Naturalization Service.
No doubt.
13,000 ended up immediately in deportation proceedings, and not one was convicted of a crime related to terrorism.
Huge
so it was
impact
a broad net that was dropped on the community, and it criminalized and othered us.
Huge impact on the Muslim community. Robert Pape, the justification 20 years ago for these wars was the terror threat that the U.S. faced, as evidenced by 9/11. 20 years later, what is that threat? Is it a higher threat level? Is it a lower threat level?
That's right. But just to be clear, there was a terrorist threat on 9/11. The problem wasn't that we shouldn't have reacted at all. The problem is we shouldn't have overreacted so massively that we would actually create more terrorists than we were killing in the effort to make ourselves safer. Now, today, we are still under its Al-Qaeda. We have taken its bases out of Afghanistan. We've killed bin Laden. Took us 10 years, but yes, we did kill bin Laden. And so in the sense of Al-Qaeda is a shell of its former self. But the war on terror, invading those two countries, harming so many people, that has stirred up a hornet's nest of terrorists. And so we have to be aware that going forward, terrorism remains a clear and present danger. Our challenge is not to overreact again. We should have followed policies that are now called over the horizon, that is, relied on selective use of air power, our intelligence, occasional use of special forces. That's what got bin Laden. That's the kind of policy that defeated ISIS.
And this is what
President doing that from the beginning, and we need to do that.
President Biden has been talking about employing these kinds of policies. Thomas Mockaitis, in your view, how has the terror threat to the United States changed, both externally and now internally, given January 6th?
Yeah, well, the first thing is we have made the likelihood of a catastrophic 9/11 style attack much harder to pull off. I'm not worried about Afghanistan being a base for terrorism, because the day of the big terrorist training camp is over. They're going to hit us the way they did in Paris, the way they did at the Pulse nightclub, the way they did on January 6th to recognize the domestic threat. Small-scale attacks, cells, lone wolves. Right now, I continue to be far more concerned about far-right white supremacist groups operating inside the United States with an anti-government militia, sovereign citizen kind of mentality. I think the major ISIS splinter, IS Khorasan, is going to be so busy battling the Taliban for the foreseeable future that I don't think it poses a serious threat. Terrorism is a persistent problem, not an existential threat. And Bob's absolutely right. We don't want to become an enemy to ourselves and our neighbors by making it the focus of our attention the way we have.
And Hatem Abudaya, has Islamophobia curbed in the last 20 years? You mentioned what happened after 9/11. Is it better now than it was then?
Yeah, I think it's been very consistent. And remember, the Islamophobia and the anti-Arab, and really anti-immigrant, anti-black, anti-people of color sentiment is not just an interpersonal attack. It's not just an issue of hate crimes, which we did see and we still see to this day. It's really an issue of the policy and the legislation that was passed after September 11th to really broadly criminalize and scapegoat the Arab community. The thing that I'm most concerned about, in all honesty, is that, it is the United States. We have to say and we have to recognize and admit after all these years that, has on some level supported these organizations that we're talking about. The U.S. supported Osama bin Laden's forces, which eventually became Al-Qaeda. They supported the Taliban for years and years, especially because the Taliban and bin Laden were fighting the Soviet Union back in the day. And even to this day, we've gotten a quote from President Biden. Our biggest problem was our allies, he told students at the Harvard Kennedy School. The Turks, the Saudis, the Emiratis, what were they doing? They were so determined to take down Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and essentially have a proxy Sunni-Shia war. What did they do? They poured hundreds of millions of dollars.
There's certainly a lot.
Thousands of tons of weapons.
We're out of time.
To anyone that would fund Assad. That came from the United States. That's what's important
certainly
to understand.
Tangled alliances and a lot to sort of look back on and analyze over the last 20 years. And our thanks to Thomas Makaitis, Hatem Abudaya, and Robert Pape. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Paris, thank you. And physical remnants of the 9/11 tragedy are permanently on display in Oak Lawn. The Southwest Side community is as close as can be to Chicago. The suburban village shares two borders with the city. Our Amanda Vinicki and producer Marissa Nelson spent the day in Oak Lawn as part of our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series. Amanda joins us now from the First Responders Memorial right on the Oak Lawn Patriot Station Metro stop. Amanda.
Yes, Brandis, I'm surrounded by 12.5 tons of steel beams carved, or sculptures, that is, carved from beams from the World Trade Center. Local first responders here in Oak Lawn were instrumental in raising funds for this project, including police officer Pat Curran, who back in 2001 had only been with the apartment for about 2.5 years when he volunteered to go to New York City to help police there a couple of weeks after the 9/11 attack.
We did actually get down to ground zero itself, and it was, just as bad as the pictures you see. The fires were still burning. The rubber, the smell of rubber, and it smelled like diesel fuel in the air. I'll never forget that.
Curran says that he served as relief for very tired New York police officers that had been working around the clock, searching trucks near high-value targets, verifying IDs at checkpoints, and then once being present to honor a fallen officer's memory.
I remember we were walking between assignments at one point, and we were by St. Patrick Cathedral, and a police officer came out and just said, "Hey, can you guys come in for a funeral?" There was no officers there because they were all working.
Now, much has changed since then. He's now been with the force for 23 years. The memories linger, but he says his concern as a member of law enforcement has shifted from worries about international terrorism to domestic and to regular crimes, including in schools. Now you have Mary Terry Vorder, born and raised here in Oak Lawn. After graduating from nearby Brother Rice, he joined the military and says that when he came back, like many combat soldiers from Vietnam, he was a lost soul. Then he saw an ad that the Oak Lawn Police Department was hiring, and that is where he found his place. He's now retired from a long career as a policeman here, and he was elected just in April to serve as the village's mayor. Some 55,000 people live here in Oak Lawn, making it one of Illinois' largest, or top 25 municipalities.
I often say to my wife when we talk about moving on in life, I says, why would I move? I says, my car dealer's a block away, my doctor lives on the corner, my dentist is on the other corner, and my undertaker lives down the street. I got it all. Why would I leave Oak Lawn?
Oak Lawn really saw its population begin to take off in the 70s when white residents left the south side of Chicago. And we're going to have more on the census later, but the most recent data still shows that a majority, about 80% of the population here is white. But like many other Southwest suburbs, there's also a sizable Muslim population. Karen Danielson is a member of the Mosque Foundation. It's about a 12-minute drive away in Bridgeview, and many Muslims in Oak Lawn and the surrounding area do worship there. Danielson says that while Islamophobic rhetoric existed before 9/11, the terrorist attack increased it, and in the days after the mosque saw marches, there was a lot of fear. She says it was a wake-up call for the community.
We were being associated as guilty party, as the guilty ones, and so we had to try to figure out how do we engage our society and not, continue to be this sort of isolated community from the American public. And we knew that the best way was to, become familiar to the American public for who we really are.
She says Islamophobia still exists, but she believes that Americans are learning to understand their differences. Of course, COVID does not recognize religion. It does not know race. And Oak Lawn is home to Advocate Christ Medical Center, which right now has 70 COVID patients. The medical director of the ICU hopes that the Delta surge is reaching its peak. But heading into colder weather, he says it is impossible to know what direction the virus will take next.
People ask these questions, or they're asking us to look to the future, and we have to look into our crystal ball, which is caked in concrete, and try to break it off and imagine what we're going to see, and it's hard to say. I think what we do know is that there's 90+ million Americans who are eligible for the vaccine that have not been vaccinated. And the more people that we get vaccinated, we know that they're less likely to be hospitalized when they're vaccinated. So I encourage people to go out and get the vaccine because it's safe and effective.
Now, meanwhile, Oak Lawn residents are trying to adjust to the new normal. The newly elected village clerk has 4 kids, and I asked Claire Henning if she was concerned about sending them back to school. She had a very quick answer. No, she said she was more than ready for them to return to the classroom, as were her kids.
They are more excited to be in school, definitely. I don't think anyone, parents or child, enjoyed the e-learning process, so everyone's been excited to be back in school.
So when they're not in school, or probably when they're not doing homework, Henning says that her children like to take advantage of Oak Lawn's robust park system. The village has a golf course, a couple of pools, and 24 parks. Now, renovations to one of them, Lawn Manor, were just completed this spring. Now, this construction was previously planned, but Park Director Tom Hartwig says with the lingering of the pandemic, the timing of a giant outdoor fitness center was serendipitous.
It's kind of new to Illinois. We're one of the newer park districts. There's a few others that have them, but it's a set fitness court where you walk up with your phone, you hit a QR code, and it tells you how to use the equipment, and then it's based on levels, beginner, intermediate, advanced. You can get a really amazing workout or a beginner workout, but we got lucky.
Now, if you're looking for more of a mental workout, Oak Lawn offers what Southside Escape Rooms owner Brandon Udicious says is an hour-long team-building experience unlike any other, a 9-room whodunit in which people go through the quote-unquote mansion that he and his wife designed and built. It's kind of like a live-action Clue.
Without giving too much away, we try to build our games where there's like this wow factor somewhere in the middle, where something happens and the environment changes on you. It's different than what you were expecting. So we try to build from that point before it and then after it. So when we're waiting for people to hit those wow points, where you literally will hear the crowd like clockwork every single time go, whoa! Those are those kind of moments that we wait for.
And more fun ahead in Oak Lawn after a year off because of the pandemic. This weekend, the village will once again be hosting its festival, Fall on the Green. But also this weekend, a more somber occasion at 9:11 a.m. Saturday morning. Right here, there will be a memorial ceremony remembering those lost in the 9/11 attack. With that, Brandis, back to you.
Wow, Amanda, and what a story from Officer Pat Curran earlier in your reporting. Thank you. We'll hear more from you coming up in a bit. And coming up, a homegrown music festival returns this weekend. We'll have a preview up next.
They're hoping to buy this lot to expand their commercial kitchen and get the community even more involved.
To see your child and then look in his eyes like he's losing hope of learning, it triggers something in you to want to make a difference.
And there's much more ahead on the program, including Oak Lawn's fire chief reflecting on the department's actions following 9/11. But first, after a one-year hiatus, Chicago's homegrown music fest, the Pitchfork Music Festival, returns this weekend. It'll be a typical eclectic lineup of new music and some legendary artists. Chicago Tonight producer Mark Vitale met a few performers with local ties as they prepared for a moment in the spotlight.
In a West Side rehearsal space, the Chicago band Dead gets ready for an important show.
But this is our first festival, real show. Important people are watching. So I'm usually never nervous for shows, ever. And for some reason I'm like, ooh, I better do good.
Singer, producer, and multi-instrumentalist Kia was born and raised in Chicago. Now based in Brooklyn, we met her on the eve of her homecoming show.
I'm so excited. It's like the first kind of real solo show home that I've ever had, and it's Pitchfork. A lot of my family's coming, my mom, my grandparents, my aunts. It feels really vindicating and rewarding, and I'm very proud of myself.
Kia and Dead are just two of dozens of performers at the annual 3-day festival organized by Pitchfork Media. Since 2006, the event has brought a wide variety of music and musicians from around the world to Chicago's Union Park.
Yeah, I love that. I love that there are multiple different types of musicians that are playing there. I myself am somebody that pulls, I think, from a lot of different genres when I'm inspired by music, so it's cool to be able to see a lot of us together in the same place.
This will be Dead's first big show since early in the pandemic when they were on their way to the South by Southwest Festival in Austin, Texas. The fest was canceled before they got there. At the same time, movie stars and NBA players started catching the virus.
Tom Hanks got COVID and we turned around, basically. That was the cultural moment. Everyone was like, NBA, Tom Hanks, and then we're like, let's turn this car around and go back home.
I dropped my album right at the beginning of the pandemic, and it felt super bittersweet to be getting recognized and received, but having it be, cut off or limited.
The performers are eager to play to a crowd once again.
I just want people to feel. So I've always tried to write music that either encourages people to cry or laugh or feel uninhibited, because it's how I feel most of the time.
The power of music is its ability to make us move and make us feel. And so I kind of like to do both. Communicate strong things in a way that makes you want to groove or want to dance or want to cry or just feel something,
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
And the band Dead performs Friday afternoon at the Pitchfork Music Festival. Kia performs with her band on Sunday. Headliners over the weekend include Phoebe Bridgers, St. Vincent, and Erykah Badu. And now, Paris, back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. And still to come on Chicago tonight, WTTW News has learned of new allegations against Alderman Jim Gardiner. Details on how he may have misused court documents. It's been 20 years since Oak Lawn's fire chief was deployed to Southwest Asia and Iraq after the 9/11 attacks. We hear his story. A look at how Bronzeville played a role in shaping 3 young women's lives in author Dawn Turner's new book. And the Bears stick with starting quarterback Andy Dalton, but all eyes will be on rookie Justin Fields. We will talk to James Big Cat Williams to preview the game and the season. But first, some more of today's top stories. Next time you fly through O'Hare Airport, you might notice a little less construction on the runways.
The OMP reconfigured nearly the entire airfield. It modernized our antiquated runways that for years gave this airport a reputation for delays and extended stays.
City officials today marked the completion of 16 years of work to modernize the runways, reduce delays, and pave the way for future terminal redevelopment. The $6 billion overhaul has meant adding 4 new runways, extending 2 existing ones, and building new air traffic control towers. There's a new entrant on the GOP side in the race for Illinois governor. Today, a downstate venture capitalist named Jesse Sullivan entered the race, and campaign filings show he's already raised upwards of $11 million. Here his kickoff campaign ad. Sullivan is the founder and CEO of Alter Capital. That's a venture capital group based in California. Sullivan faces GOP primary candidates Darren Bailey, Paul Schimpf, and Gary Rabine. More heat on embattled 45th Ward Alderman James Gardiner. WTTW News first reported this morning that the Cook County Circuit Court Clerk's Office opened an internal investigation into how court documents got into Gardiner's hands. Specifically, those documents are related to a case involving a constituent in Gardiner's 45th Ward who has been critical of the alderman. WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now with more. Heather, good to see you. What you and I reported this morning, Alderman Gardiner urged that these court documents be put out as dirt on a constituent that we mentioned had been critical of him. So the connection here is that Gardiner's ward superintendent is a man named Charles Sakanich. He has a mother who works as a clerk in the circuit court's office. The probe is surrounding allegations that employee, Sakanich's mother, got those court records and used them for inappropriate non-court purposes, a.k.a. sending them to the alderman's office to be used as dirt on that constituent. Now, the clerk's office confirmed the investigation is not naming the employee. Heather, fill us in on the rest of this story.
Well, this really goes to the heart of what was in those text messages that we first reported last week, which showed Alderman Gardiner using really profane and misogynistic language about city staffers. Now, included in those text messages was the alderman telling his staffers to retaliate against members of the 45th Ward who didn't vote for him or who don't support him. And that brought a rebuke from Mayor Lori Lightfoot on Monday, who said that was never, ever acceptable for an elected official to use the power of his or her office to retaliate against those who didn't vote for him or her. So that's really what the heart of this allegation that the circuit court clerk is looking into. Did Alderman Gardiner use his official position as an alderman to retaliate against somebody who created a rally against a proposal that he was blocking a development near Six Corners? So this really goes to the heart of these allegations and raises questions about how Alderman Gardiner is operating while in public office.
Right. Specifically, the court records here relate to a resident who had thrown a rally in support of this development that at the time Alderman Gardiner had opposed. And we should mention that we've reached out to Alderman Gardiner multiple times. We've not heard anything back, and there certainly will be more to come on this story. But for now, Heather, thank you so much.
Thanks, Paris.
And you can read our full story online at WTTW.com/news. And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Paris, thank you. Now we check back in with Amanda Vinicky, who spent the day in southwest suburban Oak Lawn as part of our In Your Neighborhood series. Amanda.
Yes, Brandis, I'm back here at the First Responders Memorial in Oak Lawn with the Fire Chief, Zachary Riddle. He also, for 32 years, has been a member of the Army Reserve. So thank you for your service and for sharing your experiences with us tonight. Briefly, you know, the question that I think everybody thinks about, 9/11, where were you that day 20 years ago?
Yes, and thank you for having me tonight, and thank you for your service as well. On the morning of 9/11, I was a young firefighter, just getting off a 24-hour shift, and we were all standing in the day room, kind of watching the events on TV. And oddly enough, my father was a fire chief at that point at a different department, and he was taking a class about 5 miles from my location. So he and I were close that morning as we tried to figure out what was happening.
Figure out what's happening, thinking about family and all of the important aspects of life. Shortly after the attack, you were deployed to the Middle East.
Yes, about 17 months after that, I was deployed for about 18 months to Southwest Asia and Iraq, and we served almost 2 tours there.
A lot, of course, has gone on with America, most recently drawing out of Afghanistan, all part of this long-running war on terror. Any sort of thoughts that you have as we're entering a new phase?
Well, you always want to go back to the recognition and respect for the women and men who have served in uniform for the last 20 years and the times in their lives that they've had to be away from their families, to be wherever they're sent to accomplish the mission. So number one, it's a great deal of respect, not only for the last 20 years, but for previous to that. And also the first responders who 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, also spend time away from their families to accomplish the mission and help the people of the community. So I think the thread of selfless service goes through men and women in uniform. It doesn't matter if they're in the military or first responder or any other type of leadership role in the community. Everybody's out there trying to do great things and do their part.
What is different now when you don this uniform versus back in 2001? Do you feel prepared? Have things changed in terms of how you do your job and the threat of a potential attack?
Well, I think as far as wearing this uniform, I'm very proud and honored to wear this uniform of an Oak Lawn firefighter. There's only 74 of us that can do that, and we wear it proudly and every day that we possibly can. The fire service has become higher trained nationwide, specifically in special operations rescue and building collapse and other types of specialized needs that were identified during 9/11 20 years ago. And we have gotten all the training, education, professional development to make all of us better, smarter, faster at our jobs.
Thank you very much for, again, sharing your experiences with us and all that you do. And I know that Fire Chief Zachary Riddle will be here Saturday for the 9/11 memorial taking place, again, right here early that morning. With that, Brandis, back to you.
Amanda, thank you. Journalist and author Dawn Turner has been writing about race, politics, and people her whole career. But in the latest book, her latest book, she's turned her pen inward as she reflects on her own life's path and how it diverged from the lives of the 2 girls she grew up closest to, her sister Kim and her best friend Deborah. The book is called 3 Girls from Bronzeville, a uniquely American memoir of race, fate, and sisterhood. And author Dawn Turner joins us now to talk about it. Dawn, welcome back to Chicago tonight.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So the 3 girls that you write about, of course, are you, your sister Kim, and your childhood best friend Deborah, and it follows the 3 of you through your very divergent paths. Your sister was born when you were 3. Can you tell us a little bit about Kim and your family?
Oh, absolutely. When my parents brought her home from the very moment, she was a mystery to me. Headstrong, fearless, and stubborn. And my mother would say, that little girl's not afraid of anything, and that scares me. She was the one who challenged my parents from the beginning to the end. And I was the kid who was not perfect, but I was much more quiet. And so we were very different in that regard. And then she was, yes.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, she was just always on the move, and that was just her personality.
And then, of course, you became friends with Deborah later on when you were 8. Would you say that the 2 of you were an unlikely pair?
Absolutely. She had very much the same qualities as my sister. I would always say that Deborah and I were best friends, but Kim and Deborah were soulmates. And the things that I did not admire in my little sister, because she was my sister, I loved in Deborah. She also trafficked in trouble, headstrong, challenged the teachers. For me, rules were scaffolding. And for them, they were just something that they wanted to push out of the way. And really, it's that whole notion about opposites attracting, and that absolutely that dynamic is present in both of us.
Of course,
all of them.
In all of us. Of course, the fourth character in the title is Bronzeville itself, especially the private lawless gardens apartments where you lived and the nearby Ida B. Wells public housing. What role do you think, these buildings and these neighborhoods play in your lives as well as the lives of Kim and Deborah?
Oh, absolutely. This was our community. Bronzeville, first of all, was the cradle of the Great Migration. And our community was kind of in the middle. So there was Lake Meadows to the north of us, the Lake Meadows apartments to the north of us, which was for the Black elite. Judges and lawyers and politicians lived there. And as you just mentioned, the Ida B. Wells homes was, in its heyday, it was a beautiful and just a beautiful and forward-thinking place, a haven. And it was supposed to be the answer to the awful tenements that the people who had come up from the Great Migration, during the Great Migration, they had to live in these horrible places. And Ida B. Wells was supposed to be the answer to that. And it, after a while, the city abandoned it, and it became a place where the conditions were deplorable. So we were in the middle. Lawless Gardens was privately owned, but we were working class people with middle class aspirations. And so you had this tension between between the Ida B. Wells homes and Lawless. But it was kind of perceived. There were these perceived differences because we were all just people who were striving, but under very different conditions.
And during your time as a columnist at the Tribune, you wrote about Deborah's time in prison. And I don't think I'm giving anything away in the book here. Obviously, no. It'll all be there. And her return to college while she was in prison. What was it like, writing about a friend as she, writing about her story as it's happening?
Well, in 2000, I wrote about her for the first time, and that's when she was sentenced for 50 years in prison, convicted of murder. And then I wrote about her a couple of years later, just kind of a follow-up. And I realized those stories were very much a cautionary tale type story. But then when I wrote about her in 2007, she had graduated with honors, summa cum laude, and while in prison, graduated from college. It was something that she had struggled to do while she was on the outside. And that story resonated. I got letters from people all over the world, all over the country, actually, emails, letters. And because that story was a story about redemption and transformation. And I think we really, we admire those types of stories. We love the whole narrative of people who are able to change their lives. And that, for Deborah and her prison experience, which I think is unfortunately a little rare in that she was able to do that in prison.
Right. She and the women who graduated with her are certainly the exception in prison. I also imagine it was painful for you to write about your sister, both your friend, but of course your sister Kim, who died so young. Was all of this therapeutic for you?
I had never written about Kim before. In fact, when I started to think about this as being a book, I thought it was about two girls, it was about Deborah and me, two girls who had taken two spectacularly different paths. But then when I started writing the proposal and I started showing it to people, then my sister, who very much her personality, leapt off the page, and it became a story about three girls. And yes, it is. I would not say that it's a story that has brought me complete closure, but it definitely has. I've got a chance to do research and talk to people and learn things I didn't know about them or myself. And it was just an amazing experience. And I will continue to write the types of stories, other stories that I write, that have been an offshoot of, the two of them being in my life. But I think that this story, I get to put it to bed now.
Put it to bed, as the writers say. That's a good place to leave it, to get folks interested in the book as well. If they want to know more, they got to read it. But we're going to leave it there for now. Dawn Turner, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Again, the book is called Three Girls from Bronzeville, a uniquely American memoir of race, fate, and sisterhood. And Dawn Turner will appear at the Printers Row Lit Fest in partnership with the Chicago Public Library. That's this weekend, and at the Chicago Humanities Festival in October. You can find more details on our website. Up next, more from Amanda Vinicky, who's reporting live from Oak Lawn. But first, a look at the weather.
And now to Amanda Vinicky, who has spent the day reporting in Oak Lawn as part of our In Your Neighborhood series. Amanda.
Yes, and I'm now joined by Delara Saeed. She's president of the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition, also an educator. And educating is what you were doing the morning of September 11th, 2001.
Yes, first of all, as you're asking me to reflect on that day, my thoughts and prayers go out to the Americans that we lost, the lives that we lost that day, and to the first responders like Chief Riddle and others that were supporting us. I was a fifth grade teacher. I was teaching in my classroom with my students. It was language arts, and they were in small groups reading around the classroom. And my principal knocked on the door and called me to the door, and she whispered in my ear what had happened. And the guidance she provided is to keep the students in the classroom. We need to get more information, stay away from the news, and we'll try to get you what you need. And it was a tragic and a horror that we all felt as Americans.
And what do you say now? What should children learn about this event? You were teaching fifth grade today.
So I have gone on to become an administrator and to leave the actual teaching, but I would ask all educators to be authentic and transparent with our students and our children. We all deserve to understand that as Americans, we are leaders of the world for what is right and what is good, but we also make our own mistakes. And have dialogue, have conversations, let them be critical thinkers about who we are as Americans. And a true patriot loves their country enough to make it even better.
A major undertaking was completed to figure out exactly who we are as Americans, and by that I'm referencing the census. And this is something else in which you were involved. There are some challenges when it comes to counting people who are of Arab descent, right?
Sure. Census 2020 was an incredible undertaking, one we have done every 10 years since the 1770s, right? And so we know from this census that we are a growing nation, that we are a nation that is also getting more and more diverse. Mixed race families and communities are growing at a fast rate. And unfortunately, we also know that we have undercounted people of color, and we have miscounted Arabs and Middle Easterners as white. And so these are things we now can correct for the 2030 census, but now for the next decade, we have to keep this in mind as we build roads, build bridges, translate things in libraries and in documents, that there are some changes and challenges, and we didn't get it all right.
And I know that there has been an increasing Muslim population, particularly here in the southwest suburbs, and frustrations about the lack of representation there in those new legislative maps, but I'm afraid we're going to have to cover that for another day. So thank you so much again. That is Delara Saeed. She is an educator, also the president and co-founder of the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition. With that, back to you in the studio.
All right, Amanda, thank you so much. And up next, a preview of the Chicago Bears' upcoming season. But first, we look at some events happening this weekend. The NFL season officially kicks off tonight, but the Bears have to wait until Sunday night for their primetime matchup with the Rams. That graphic is back for another year. Here with a preview of the game and the season is James Big Cat Williams, former offensive lineman for the Chicago Bears from 1991 to 2002. James Big Cat Williams, so great to see you.
Hey, Paris, good to talk to you too, man.
Yep, good to have you back. All right, so quarterback Andy Dalton is the game one starter over the rookie Justin Fields. Is this the right move by the coaching staff?
I don't know if it's the right move or not, but I don't think anyone's going to talk them out of their decision. I think that Nagy, going by his Kansas City roots, his Kansas City tree with Andy Reid and what they did with Mahomes, he's going to try and pull off the same thing here in Chicago. Have a young quarterback sit behind a wily vet, and hopefully that wily vet can get them into the playoffs, and they don't want to see Fields until next year. No guarantee that's going to work, though.
No, and we didn't see a whole lot of Dalton in the preseason. What does he bring to that position into the offense?
Well, you're talking about a guy that, you know, he's played behind not bad O-lines, but O-lines in Cincinnati that didn't give him very much protection. A lot of people just see what he did in Dallas last year, which wasn't a lot. But he's a guy that's been to the playoffs several times, and he does have a good grasp on the game. So, you know, if the Bears can protect him, then he should be able to do some things well for them out there and run Nagy's offense the way Nagy's been wanting to see it run.
How short a leash do you think he's going to have before Nagy makes the switch, assuming Dalton, you know, has some rough games?
However long of a leash it is, it's going to be too long for the fans here in Chicago. You know, people want to see Fields now, and, you know, you've got this new shiny toy that you just can't play with. It's just sitting underneath the Christmas tree. It's wrapped, you know what it is, and you want to play with it, but, you know, your parents are smacking your hands telling you can't touch it. So I don't know how long they're going to give Dalton. I don't know if it's, you know, do you lose the first 3 games or, you know, the first quarter of the season before you say that, okay, we've got to take a look at Fields? Or, you know, what happens if Dalton goes 3-1 through the first quarter of the season?
Right.
They're definitely going to stick with him then.
You got to stick with the quarterback that gives you the best chance to win. What is your impression from what you've seen of Fields? I mean, he's had some dazzling plays.
Well, he's a young phenom. I mean, you know, you talk about the kid in Mahomes, and you talk about all these guys that have come out of college playing football with the baseball background, and he fits right into that mold. He can make all the throws. He can make all those throws while being on the run and being pressured. You're talking about a kid that has no fear out there on the football field. And, you know, we heard a sample of that after a couple preseason games where he was like, this game isn't too fast for me. You know, after practicing against that Bears defense, you know, I feel like he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be.
He's ready to go. And then there's some other top 10 QB picks that are going to start. You mentioned the offensive line. Andy Dalton never played behind great offensive lines. Tevin Jenkins was a guy you wanted the Bears to draft. He's an offensive lineman that's injured right now. So how does this offensive line look to you?
Well, when you look at the middle's solid. When you're talking about Mustapher, Whitehair, and Daniels, you know, the middle's pretty solid. Now you have to just hope that all 3 of those guys could stay healthy. You know, no big injuries. They're going to have the little dings that they're going to have to deal with week in and week out. But, you know, Jason Peters is it's the toss-up. You don't know, you know, you're talking about a 39-year-old left tackle. And, you know, at some point in time, the treads on the tires start to run a little thin. So you just don't know where he's at right now. And then you have Jermaine Ifedi on the other side. And, you know, he played pretty well at right tackle last year. So they're going to give him a shot and see how he can do. But, you know, you have to have a plan in place just in case things start to fall apart, just in case, you know, Peters isn't able to give you as many games or as much time as you'd like.
Sometimes it's a revolving door there, and you have to have multiple offensive linemen ready to go. What about on the defense? Some injuries so far to Eddie Goldman, who's missed last year because of COVID protocols. Khalil Mack, Danny Trevathan banged up. How does this D look right now?
Well, I think with Mack and Goldman, I'd like to give it another day. You know, as long as those guys practice by Friday, and Mac has been practicing, he's just been limited. Goldman hasn't done anything at all, but you have to think that if he can practice by Friday, he has a good shot of playing. They also have the young rookie, what's his name, Tonga? Yeah, I think, and that's the young nose guard that's a rookie. You know, they're excited about him. You know, with the Trevathan injury, with him not being able to play for 3 weeks, I think they already had a plan in place with Ogletree, because I think it was going to be hard for Trevathan to get back on the field the way Ogletree practiced and played in the preseason.
Well, Alec Ogletree, the veteran linebacker, you mentioned that the Bears signed this year. All right, we only have 30 seconds left. Prediction for Sunday night and prediction for the season.
Unfortunately, I don't know if this is a game that they can pull off versus the Rams. I think the Rams might have a little too much firepower on defense for what that offense is going to be putting out there. But, you know, we've seen stranger things happen. But 31-21 Rams over the Bears. I hate to say it, but that's the way I got to go.
And the Rams have Matt Stafford, a quarterback who's faced the Bears a couple of times in his career. All right, well, Big Cat, great to have you. Hopefully we have some happy conversations in the weeks to come, and take care.
I hope so, Parrish. You take it easy, man.
All right, thanks. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Thursday night.
Please join us tomorrow night at 7 for the Week in Review. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.